Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on a short, small little building study of a building in Key West. What got me are the beautiful shadows on the side of the building cast by the palm trees in the Florida light. You're welcome to paint that along with me, or you can just hang out with me and paint and work on whatever you're working on in your studio today. Sometimes it's nice to have a little company while we make our art. So first things first, I have just fast forwarded this because I'm just basically drawing a border. Sometimes I just paint and fill up the whole page, but today I kind of wanted the drawing to be within a border and have a little bit of a frame. So I'm adding the rooftop now and the sidewalk, just blocking in exactly where the sides of my white building will be. I'm putting in the white bars or posts of that little fence you see. And I've decided to draw everything with an erasable Prismacolor green colored pencil. And I chose green just because there's so much of it in the scene. I think that if, and I'm expecting when, it still shows up in the final drawing, I think it will be very complimentary instead of, just graphite all the time. So this is new for me. Normally I just use a pencil or even drawing in ink. But today I'm going to use this erasable pencil crayon. And I think that I didn't even erase very much. Like I just left all my sketch marks. I don't know if that's just because I forgot it was erasable. I bought these very recently. Or, I just don't mind the sketchy look, which is also true. So I've got the sides of the building for sure in there, and I'm trying to get the spacing right of the windows. I noticed that they are all equally spaced apart. And I actually moved it, and I know in the resource photo it's not directly over the post centered, but this is a perfect example of how I'm not super married to the reference photo. It's there to help me. It's there to help me grow my observational skills, of course, but I don't always think it's necessary for it to match it perfectly. That's really not the point of drawing. So remember that when you're working on things. Is it the most important thing that you match it? No. I mean, if you're learning high realism and the whole goal is to perfectly replicate something, yes, but that's really not, you got to think about what your purpose for today's piece of art is, and it's certainly not mine to copy things exactly. The reference photo is just a way to learn and grow, to stay grounded in what I'm working on, and also because, at least for today's painting, I certainly couldn't just invent this scene, right? Like it's the reference photo with those beautiful shadows on the white building that got my attention, that inspired me to do it in the first place. And full disclosure, I am practicing my urban sketching skills. I'm taking one of Liz Steele's workshops called Watercolor on Location. So I do a lot of exercises, just like homework studies, and decided that I would take you along on today's. So after I drew in all the windows, I laid in the trunks of our palm trees and their relative heights. And now I'm just jumping down to really very basically block in the bike. So I'm doing like 2 circles for the wheels and then an angled triangle. It's not a perfect triangle for the main part of the bike frames. And then you'll see in a second, then I will add in the other little parts of the bike frame. But for starters, just do a really basic triangle that leans towards the handlebars. The third bike is facing the opposite direction as the first 2 bikes, so my triangle will also face the opposite direction. And it's also just a little bit of a different style bike. After you've laid in the bikes, you can draw a couple of those lines of the sort of the base of the fence and where it meets the base of the bikes and the sidewalk begins. Notice I turned my sketchbook to the side. You do not have to keep your drawing paper straight up and down all the time and move your hand and body around. Sometimes it's easier just to move the paper that you're working on. I added the garbage can and this tree branch in the background, and then I realized, oh, there's a background over here too. I literally didn't see it. So now I'm adding just the top of the rooftop on the left-hand side and a bit of that bush. I'm taking that bush outside of the frame. I love that effect when certain chosen elements extend beyond the frame. So this is the pencil I was using. Prismacolor Colorase, and that was the green color. And now it's time to dive into some watercolor. I'm just using my travel Nalgene cup here of water. I was too lazy to go find a ball jar and fill it with water. And I've mixed a light yellow-green to lay in the palm trees first. I'm doing this because they're the thing that is in the foreground. The things, words, I tell you people. So I'm adding some dark green as well. The palm trees are a bit more yellow than at first I don't really want to make them that yellow. I was like, oh, they look like they're dying. So I leaned a little more green than I was actually observing. So I'm mixing several different yellows in with a green to make a yellow green. I rarely use just one color. I've said it before in my videos that the more mixing you do, the more sophisticated your paintings will look. So I'm starting from the center of the palm trees and doing sort of feathery brush marks going out. And I'm paying attention to what is the sort of spine of each frond, and then branching or sort of feathering each individual leaf off of that main spine of each shape. So sometimes you're looking at them and they're to the side, you just see the spine and the one side feathering down. And then sometimes they're coming straight at you and you see both sides coming off of that main spine. So try to think of the perspective of each frond as you're looking at it. That will help you simplify it into just a basic shape instead of kind of worrying about all of the different overlapping leaves here. It's just a bit chaotic. So just think of it in terms of the main branches of the top of each palm tree. Here I am embracing the yellow, especially on these top left palms. They're a serious sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Yellow ochre-ish. Now I've mixed a brown and I'm dragging it down to make the trunks. In the picture itself, I don't see it as much as a brown. I see it kind of like gray, but there is brown in the trunks. And I tried to add some of that dark shadow on the left trunk and it wasn't really taking. It kind of darkened the whole thing and not just in little areas of shadow. So you'll see me go back and do that later when it's more dry. But dropping dark into a wet just sort of changes the color of the whole trunk right now. My garbage can is literally the most basic, simple cylinder shape that you could even think of. That's not the focus of the story here, so I'm not going to draw attention to it. I mixed a red and I'm just doing the triangle of the frame of the bike. That's as far as we got with the drawings of the bike. And here I am adding like the little branches off of that main triangular frame. But it helped me to get the triangle first because a bike is a weird shape. Like I've always had trouble drawing bikes. But this was a really straightforward way to break it down. So I did the triangle first, and then I do the little branches off of it for the seat, the handlebars, and heading towards each tire. Now I'm just doing the tires. I circle several times to make it look more sketchy, and I used my hand because I made a mistake and it just smeared more. And then I thought, okay, I'm gonna try to wet that area and pick it up with the paper towel. I thought, you know what? I'm painting a dark green fence over it, you're not going to see that red in the end. So I just continued on with the bikes. The brush I'm using is a dagger striper. It's only a 1/4 inch, so it's a very small dagger. Liz Steele uses I want to say a 1/2 inch dagger, like a much bigger dagger. Her paintings are so loose and gorgeous and fluid. I don't think on the size that I'm working that I could work in with any bigger a brush in terms of the dagger size. The dagger is like, it's a very odd brush. And it's not like a round. You don't have as much control because of the shape. It's kind of like, I don't know, a little unruly, which is really great if you're looking to loosen up your style, get a little less tight if you're someone who, is too tight a painter. I just did the little gear shift on each one with a little suggested circle. And then I dove in with that same sort of blackish gray to do some of the shadows, and I don't know that I'd recommend this approach. I think it would have been better to just do the window shutters green to begin with, and then later go in with the black. So if you want to skip adding the black of the windows in there, please do so. It wasn't the best approach. But yeah, the dagger will help you loosen up, and it will make some crazy messes on your page if you're interested in trying out a dagger brush. Mine is just Artist's Loft Vienna, so it's not a very expensive kind. I think I got it at like Michael's or something. So I'm going to mix some darker greens now. I'm just using what looks like a hunter green. I put in some ultramarine blue and a little bit of the more blue green. It's kind of more like a turquoise green or a viridian. So if you skipped the black part of the windows that I told you might not have been the best approach, just dive in now with the green of the windows, and you can see me lifting the paint off. So I added a bit much, and then you just dab your brush on the paper towel and you can lift the paint right off the page. It's kind of forgiving in that way. So now I think I started doing that bush and realized that's not even the same green. So I'm going to do the fence instead. And it's not a vertical and horizontal crisscross, it's a diagonal crisscross. The dagger allowed me to get like really thin hatch marks, which I was very impressed with. So in the future, I have made a note to myself, hey, if I need to make little hatch marks, this dagger brush allowed me some seriously thin lines. I was impressed. And then I just kind of go around the border of it. It gets a bit messy. It kind of bleeds into the hatch marks, but I don't mind that the fence itself has that border before the hatch marks. So that's why I did that. It has a kind of green border around each part of the fence. I must say it's an interesting fence for sure. Not the main part of this drawing, like not the main story. I really want to kind of focus on what the painting is about, but again, I think I just laid in the fence first because, like the palm fronds, it's closer to us than the building, and so there are things that are going to disappear because they are behind. So go ahead and block in the rest of your green window shutters. I'm kind of blocking in how they are behind the fronds, but I'm not overthinking it. I'm just like, what can I see? What does the palm tree block? If I were to do this painting again, I think that maybe the least successful part was the window shutters. I maybe could do that more systematically in the future, but since this was just meant to be a real quick study, I didn't really want this painting to take more than half an hour. See, I'm lifting the paint off of that gray window. There's a lot that you can't even see, like you can't really tell what's going on in the photo, and that's how it would be in real life too. Like I don't have perfect vision. I've got good vision, but we're looking at something when we're out there on plein air, we're looking at something in different conditions. There's chaos, there's cars, there's interruptions, like it's just what you can observe. And so given this was just a picture that I put up on my computer, there's a lot that I didn't observe at first or didn't observe fully because it's kind of a small resource photo, and that's fine. We're getting the impression. What is the story again? Keep returning to that. For me, the story is the shadow shapes on the wall. So we will see later if I succeed at focusing and really depicting those the way that I want to. I want to add that if you're painting along with me, feel free to pause at any time. You can go back. You can even change the playback speed. What that will do is make me sound crazy, right? If you're playing it slower, I might start talking like this. But it'll give you a chance to follow along if that's your intention today. But my goal was to work quick and work sort of loosely in a sketchy style. And I have been painting a long time, so my speed might be a lot faster than yours, and don't get discouraged by that. Other painters work much faster than me, and I don't get discouraged. I just hit pause if I'm following one of their videos. So take your time in whatever stage you need to take your time in, and just pause me. I'll be back. I'll be here for you when you're ready for the next part of the painting. And it is time now to mix a pale blue-gray. I saw blue in the shadows. You might see a different color in the shadows, but I am going to use this watered down gray-blue and the thin part of my dagger brush to make some shadows on the wall of both the trunk and the fronds. You can see I'm turning my brush every different direction. If you've never used a brush like this, or you're just not as practiced with the brushes you have, then use the page to the side to just practice making marks. Hey, if I do this in this direction, does it make a thin mark, or does it drag and make a thick mark laying down a ton of liquid? So just practice every single different direction that you use a dagger brush. It'll do something different. Sometimes it lays a big swath down and sometimes it gives you those really nice thin lines you're looking for. So I was experimenting right on the painting because I just don't feel very precious about it. And I have used it before. I am a little rusty. I haven't really painted with a dagger brush in, I don't know, maybe several months. So sometimes I got it wrong, and that's okay. Using my finger there to pick up a little bit of the shadow that got onto the white fence post beam. I didn't pre-sketch all the shadow shapes. I didn't really want those lines in there, but if you're a bit newer or a bit less confident just drawing with a brush and paint, that's called direct watercolor, then please go ahead and add a little extra step here. Pause the video, grab a light graphite pencil, like a harder lead, so HB or harder, so HB, 2H, things like that, and just really lightly block in some of the outlines of your shadow shapes, if that will make you more comfortable going in and having paint right on the white with your gray. Otherwise, you can just draw with your brush, just like I'm doing. I'm using that brush there to kind of cut back into the leaf a second ago. Not right now, now I'm doing the roof, but you can use the dark colors to cut up into the leaves and create that sort of, those thin lines between leaf and the shadow behind it. So there's some beautiful shadows on the building roof in the background, but they are black actually. So if you want to darken that background up, I'm splattering on purpose a little bit here just to give the drawing a bit more character. I really underplayed the splatter today. You could way overplay that if you want and splatter a bunch more on there. I just couldn't think of what color I'd want to splatter more of other than green. And I was just more concerned with getting my drawing in. And I thought, okay, I'll add more splatter later, and I don't think I did. I think I kind of forgot to add that element, and that's fine. The background beside the building is quite dark, so I've taken the green and added even more black to it. You can add red to your green as well, like a dark red, to kind of turn it into more of a brown or a neutral if you don't want it to look as gray. But yeah, I noticed that the bush and the tree shadow in the background there that are beside the building are pitch dark. So I put a little hatch mark in the fence there to show it showing through. It was a bit messy, but I'm okay with the effect. It is just about right now where I realize there's this sort of a roof that is making that window, it's like cutting that window off. I thought it was a different sized window, but no, it's all the shutters are the same, but there's like a roof coming off of that center window. It's like, oh, look, I didn't even see that before. So sometimes as your observation goes from general to specific, you notice more and more. You're like, oh, I should have seen that right off the bat. But the process generally that I teach, and if you're a beginner drawer, that's definitely the way to go, is you move general to specific. So capture the big overarching shapes and things and colors, and then work towards more specificity. Here I am, I just used a pale, even paler than the shadows, okay? So I watered it down even more so that it would be even paler than those shadow shapes. And I started doing straight little thin lines to show the siding of the building. And then I was avoiding the shadows, the fronts, then I realized they go over top of the hatch marks. So the hatch marks need to go right through all of the shadows. They go right through. Yes, you know what I'm trying to say. I was kind of loose with it, and in areas it did overlap other things that maybe it shouldn't have, but I really don't think that made too much of a difference. It's here where I realized the shadow did go on top of that fence post. And then I decided, even though the other ones weren't outlined, that I would outline them just a little to draw attention to their shape. And I used that same pale gray to lay in the sidewalk edge and the shadows. I just kind of dropped a tiny bit more, really loosely, tiny bit more dark right where the bike wheels met the side, then drew in the gray line behind them of the fence wall. I mixed my gray even more paler with some water to lightly tone the sidewalk. I wanted it to be darker than that white fence. So now I'm just mixing or grabbing this light gray to put in the edge of the roof. I think in the resource photo, a lot more of the roof shows, but I didn't really want to move it up anymore, just based on where it was sitting in my page and how I wanted to have a border around the drawing. So I just kept the top of the roof pretty low. And then I started blocking in some way darker values. That's the last step really I want to do. Everything's blocked in, but I'm realizing that beside the building there's a lot of dark value, so I'm adding in some shadows now. We always want to squint at our pieces before we decide they're done and ask ourselves if we see a full value range. It's possible to make beautiful paintings that are high key, which means like a lot lighter values that still have a range within them, but they don't go to the pure black. But in general, especially if you're a beginner, look to try to get as much value contrast in your work as possible, unless it truly does support your subject matter to keep it all sort of within pale values or really dark values. Maybe you're doing something moody and broody and spooky. So it really depends on what you're aiming for. But if you're just out there doing urban sketching like this and you're aiming for realism and to convey a scene as successfully as possible, I recommend the value. So I'm punching in the shadows here. And I'm also starting to mark up the trees and realizing I'm going to need to mix some more green and get these tree fronds, the actual leaves, drawn in. I'm just looking to enhance any of the shadows, including the shadows that are on this trunk. I'm just mixing brown and black. Now that the trunks are dry, I can do kind of like speckled and spotted shadows on the trunks here and there, and it won't just bleed in and turn the whole thing darker. It's actually sitting out now as shadows, as you can see. So sometimes it's just patience. You have to wait for things to dry before you can achieve the effect that you want to. I remember saying earlier that I use the dark and you can chisel into the trees, and so that's what I'm doing here, and that's what I did on the other side of the house, is kind of cut up with dark into that tree. Now I've mixed sort of blue-gray, a little more blue than any of the other shadows in gray, and I'm just blocking in that rooftop. It's such a mild detail. Like, I don't think anybody will even think about the roof. And that's what you want to do if it's not your focal point. You want to have things in there that people don't even know, they don't even register are there. So I'm just dashing in these leaf lines, and I'm approaching it in somewhat of an abstract manner. I'm really not staring at the reference very much. I just am glancing over to see the general shapes of the trees, and then blocking in and marking in what I think it needs to be done. They just need more texture, really, since the bulk of each shape was already there. So I did some dark green with the thin part of the brush, and I also mixed this bright green and then used the side of it to get a big swath of color. And back in again with the dark. So I'm not super systematic. I just kind of jump in with whatever color I feel like needs to be added to each branch. This part was really fun. Chop, 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 chop. I also am such a fan of hatching and cross hatching, so being able to do that kind of mark making with this brush was so enjoyable. If that is something that would interest you in the future, like a drawing class where we use hatching and cross hatching to achieve all of our shading, let me know in the comments, and I will dream up a scene or a subject that we can approach with maybe pen and ink, or graphite. We could do it with pencil as well. I just dropped in some gray in the back just so that it didn't look like it was unfinished. So almost like glazing. I just put a very light wash over it, and I didn't put anything in the corner in terms of sky, like that little sliver of blue. I thought it might be distracting. So this is where I stopped. Thanks again for hanging out and painting along with me today in the studio. I hope you enjoyed this little quick, short, fun watercolor study. It's what I practice all the time in the studio so that when I'm outside on plein air, I have a lot more fluidity and a lot more immediacy with what I'm looking at. I'm quicker, and it's just much more pleasant with more practice in the studio when you finally go out and use the same techniques in the elements. And thank you again for subscribing and liking and sharing with anyone you think might be interested in these art videos. It helps me create more of them for you. And I really, really want to keep building this online little art community we have going. Until next time, have a wonderful week in your studios, and I'll see you for the next art video soon.